Good morning, North Dakota residents. My name is Scott Louser, and I am coming to you from the Next Home Legendary Properties office in Minot. And I'm going to speak to you today as a District 5 representative in the North Dakota legislature on the property tax relief and reform bill that the legislature passed at the end of last session. And when I say the end of last session, that was really about 6 weeks ago. We ended the first week of May. And that bill number was 1176. It was championed by our first term governor, Kelly Armstrong. And it was a complementary bill, as I would say, to a bill that I introduced. The number on that bill was 1168. Ultimately, the idea behind 1168 for property tax relief was defeated by the legislature. But a lot of the information that was in 68 regarding the caps on local political subdivisions was mirrored and used in 1176, and the funding source in 1176 was used in the bill 1168 that ultimately again did not did not pass. I want to explain a little bit about those bills and the fallout or the discussion that was had on the floor and comments that I made regarding a potential initiated measure. There were only 4 no votes on the 1176 property tax relief and reform bill in the House. It passed unanimously in the Senate. 1168 was ultimately through the process amended to look like 76 and then defeated. So there really wasn't a second option for the legislature to vote on. Since those final days in the legislature, and some of you may know we went till past 4 in the morning on that final day. I've taken a handful of steps regarding what the next phases could be for property tax relief. I talked to a coalition that was built as we were working through the session on 1168. I've talked to a lot of constituents, whether it's face to face, phone calls, text messages, even on social media, but primarily face to face, both in the real estate industry and in the education field. I also serve on the school board in Minot locally. And I took in what I think is a bit of an unprecedented step as a legislator, and I commissioned a survey to talk to North Dakota residents about their feelings on the property tax relief and reform idea that passed the legislature. I am keeping a little bit of notes here on the side, so if I'm looking to the side, that's why. After looking at the evaluation of the time commitment, the fundraising effort, the signature gathering effort that's needed, and the results of the survey and the discussion that I've had with people, I've made the decision to not continue forward with any initiated measure, instead to focus on the implementation of 1176, primarily the promotion of the $1,600 primary tax credit, and then the implications or the impact of the 3% caps on local political subs. Now, I want to talk about, first of all, the results of the survey. I asked about 8 specific questions and then had some qualifying questions as far as demographics. And I want to go over those briefly because this may take a little time, but there's a couple questions on here that really form my decision about whether or not to proceed. The first was, did you apply for the $550 property tax credit from last year? And we had a 76% yes response on that question. The second question was, are you aware that the legislature has increased that 550 to $1,600? And that response was lower at 60%. So we don't have the awareness quite yet in North Dakota, even from those that applied for the original credit, were not aware that the credit increased. The next question, is it important to you that any property tax relief concept continues to fully implement taxes for lower value homes at the $1,600 credit? And this is a question I learned after the fact. This could impact over 60,000 properties in North Dakota. And of course, the response rate to that was 74%. People wanted to continue to see that property tax relief, even for those lower valued properties. That in this case, after talking with the insurance commissioner, up to 60,000 properties may have a net zero property tax effect after this credit is applied for. The next question, would you support a constitutional measure making property tax relief permanent, even if it meant property owners who would pay no property tax might start paying taxes again? So that's the first question that we get into on the property tax uh, issue within the Constitution. That number was relatively high at 63 to 37 yes. Now, I did not ask the question about the elimination of property tax because that was on the ballot last November. So this one simply said constitutional amendment to provide property tax, permanent property tax relief, even if it meant some people would have to pay tax. The next question, are you concerned with continuing the $1,600 property tax relief, which requires legislative action each session, could result in fluctuating or reduced relief in the future? 67% of respondents said they're concerned about fluctuating or reduced relief next session, which led me to the most important question. Would you support a constitutional measure requiring the state legislature to pay for the 60 mills property tax requirement for K-12 education, even if that would result in a reduction or the end of the $1,600 credit? That was 49% yes, 51% no. And so I have a large concern because if we proceed with a constitutional amendment regarding the 60 mills, we are already in the negative. And that should be, in my opinion, about a 20-point positive going into a measure and a signature gathering um, process. The other two questions, would you support a combination of the state legislature paying the 60 mills for all property types, not just primary residence, and a lower primary residence credit of $550, which we have now? The answer to that one was 66% yes. So, based on this survey, North Dakota residents seemingly would rather see the legislature take action in a combination of the lower mills and the primary residence credit. Now, the lower mills for all property types and not a constitutional measure. So those, and then I've got the demographics. So those are the questions that I asked. Um, Again, when I learned about the $60,000 or the 60,000 properties that may not pay property tax, that's something if I were on that bill in 1176, I think I would have promoted and sold a little harder. Um, and that also means that people that have slightly higher property tax liability than 1,600, say you've got a $2,200 liability, this substantially reduces your property taxes on your primary residence. To the credit of the coalition that I was working with and built on 1168, those groups want to see the implementation of 1176. They want to see how this works. They want to gauge if their groups and the residents of North Dakota appreciate the relief that was provided. And so they are likely not willing to go forward in sponsoring a measure. I can respect that. I get it. And I'm also learning that this one actually is the one that I probably knew and had to really talk to people about. But I'm learning that most North Dakotans do not understand what a mill is, how it's calculated, and how it impacts their property tax. And yet, that would be the issue that we would be looking at putting on the ballot. So it would require not just an education process on how this works, but then how it would impact everybody long before there's even a campaign for a yes vote. So I am a bit concerned about that, and that's coming from even people in the real estate industry with me that are not able to fully explain what a mill or a mill levy is. I am encouraged by that one question that I ended with. Would you like to see the legislature do a combination of a credit and a buy down? If I'm lucky enough to be reelected, should I announce that I'm going to run again? That decision has not been made, but for the next cycle, and I am back in Bismarck representing District 5, this is something that I would continue to work on for all of North Dakota. Now, I understand there's some people out there that would really like to see somebody else run a measure. For the reasons that I mentioned before, I just am not the person to do it. The statistics and the results of the survey don't show a positive trend towards that. For anybody out there that wants to do something like that, please reach out to me and I'll have a discussion with you about the details of what I learned and what I think a measure would be up against in North Dakota. I'd be happy to share that information with you. I do have a large concern about the caps that were implemented, in particular on school districts. I have talked about this as a triangle concept. School districts are within a triangle now from a finance standpoint. We are still required to levy those 60 mills on property taxes. We are now capped at 3% spending growth, and we are limited to a 2.5% per pupil increase from the state, which also imputes the property tax locally. So the school districts are really triangled in from three sides on revenue, but expenses continue to exceed revenue in many districts. So I'm going to continue working on that issue. I am meeting with some people in Bismarck next week to try to address some language that was in 1176 that seems to be unclear to some. But I will continue working on that in the interim. Again, if I decide to run for the legislature again, get the nomination, and then ultimately win the election for District 5, I will continue working on property tax in the next session down in Bismarck. And the last thing I have to say is absolutely make your application for your primary residence starting in 2026. $1,600 is a substantial amount of money for anybody to apply that credit against their primary residence on their property taxes. And that has to be applied for every year. The state is going to try to make it easy for those of you that own homes to do that, but absolutely you must apply by the deadline. I will continue to send videos and reminders out at the beginning of 2026 to remind people to do that and take advantage of that credit. Incidentally, there is a up to $600 renter's credit also available for those of you that do not own your own home. I will continue to give updates and I will follow up with an explanation of how mills work on property taxes and school funding in subsequent videos. Have a great week, everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.